paper of the World Tribune asked, or World Herald asked no questions about what we found. All they wanted to know was who paid for your commission, who brought you here, how much money did you receive? And Reverend James Bevel addressed that, and he did it very eloquently. And he said, we are talking about human life here, and you're fussing about nickels and dimes. And he continued to come back. Who paid for you to be here? And I reached in my billfold, and I just opened it up. And I said, every dime of my expense I bought out of my own billfold. And I said, these members here, not a single person is paid to be here and to tell the truth. You are only paid to be here to slander. And so it was very clear that he was the paid emissary and that we were not being paid. However, we have been attacked. Just the simple fact that the LaRouche name that our leader is in jail, quote, and that surely nothing good can come. But what has happened is that we have been able to identify with them. We have been slandered as they have been slandered, but it's given a tremendous amount of courage to those in Nebraska who thought nothing could happen. Since that time, I've been called on the phone, and I've had a couple people who have, in fact, at the close of the conference, two ladies wrote down my address, and then they mailed me items that I ended mailing back up to Nebraska to the proper authorities who could investigate that. And I really feel that it's extremely important that this come. What happens in Nebraska if at this point we fail? What will happen to future children? They're open game. If there are no laws against poaching, we have more poachers. If we increase the market, in fact, if you look at, when you have 500 pedophiles in the area, what if you have 500 diabetics in the area? You've got a market for insulin, don't you? If you have 500 pedophiles in the area who are recognized by a grand jury, you have a market for children, don't you? And if you don't have any law to hold that market down, won't that market share increase? Of course it will. And so this is what will happen. Nebraska, God will have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah if we don't do something about Nebraska. So it's very important that we, as God's hands and God's feet here on this earth today, reach out to people who are suffering, who have extended a call to us and have said, come help us. And I'm very proud of the Schiller Institute and of the LaRouche movement, by whatever name, for responding to that call.
This is a program about corruption in high places, about Satanism, a growing problem in America, why it exists, why it's being allowed to spread, and who is trying to cover up its existence. I don't expect to answer all these questions, but what you are about to see is a report given by a member of a Citizens Commission, which was convened and which traveled to the state of Nebraska several weeks ago to look into a case which is beginning to shock the political establishment of that state. The case began with an investigation into a failed credit union whose chief executive, one Lawrence King, is a prominent Republican Party fundraiser in the state of Nebraska. Mr. King is nationally known as the person who sang the national anthem for the Republican Party National Convention in Dallas, Texas, a few years ago. The original investigation broadened considerably when absolutely amazing revelations surfaced about Mr. King's other activities besides siphoning money from his credit union. The allegations concerned parties that were thrown at Mr. King's mansion in Omaha, which included the attendance of most of the luminaries of that state's political establishment, and which involved the procurement of young children from state orphanages for use in sexual orgies at these parties. Not only was deviant sexual behavior being practiced, but satanic cult activities were alleged to have taken place. There were 2 children who came forth to testify to these allegations. before grand juries. Those two children are currently in jail, having been accused of perjuring themselves in their testimony before these grand juries. And yet, troubling corroborative evidence continues to surface concerning their allegations. It is for this reason that this private citizens commission was convened to travel to Nebraska to look into this case. The speaker, David Hall, is a member of Operation Rescue in Dallas, Texas, and has been active in the fight against abortion for many years. He is involved in the fight against satanic cult activity for the same reasons that he's involved in the fight against abortion. What is involved is the taking of innocent lives for evil purposes. In the Nebraska case, the cover-up reached incredible proportions, involving both the head of the FBI field office, all the prominent media, and police officials. The reasons for this will become clear as this unfolds. Named as participants in the parties at Lawrence King's house, for instance, were Harold Anderson, who is the publisher of the Omaha World Herald, the leading newspaper of the state of Nebraska; Alan Bauer, a financier and indicted pedophile; and the Omaha police chief, Robert Wadman. The two young children who came forward to testify, Alicia Owens and Paul Bonacci, have been in jail approximately a year. You will hear evidence of their mistreatment while incarcerated. You will hear evidence that there was attempts made to ensure that no members of this Citizens Commission could speak to them while they were in Nebraska. You will also hear evidence of many, many citizens who had been too fearful to act previously, who have been given courage by the activities of this Citizens Commission, and who have come forward and who are now beginning to speak out. Don't think that this is an isolated problem unique to the state of Nebraska. The former FBI special agent in charge of the Los Angeles field office of the FBI, Ted Gunderson, at one time in charge of 800 special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who retired in 1979, has devoted the past 11 years to becoming more and more informed and acquainted with the problem of Satanism in our society. Ted Gunderson has spoken at meetings of the Schiller Institute in Washington State and has been interviewed in publications associated with Lyndon LaRouche, one of the founders of the Schiller Institute. Ted Gunderson is convinced that there is a consistent and persistent pattern of cover-up being carried out at the highest levels of officialdom. He's not sure why, but he has stated that this is the case. Watch carefully, and I will be back to introduce various sections of this broadcast as it unfolds.
I want to show a couple things that came in the mail. This is a tape that was sent anonymously to me in the mail, and it says Nebraska Child Abuse. This tape is a tape that was made by a man who told the children in Nebraska whom he interviewed, listen, you don't have to fear. If necessary, I'll die for you. Gary Caradori's dead. This lady right here who made this tape on and put it on a cable network access channel, she testified she is a foster care parent, and that all the children in her home she is either foster care or she has adopted from a previous foster care. And she described 10 different children, 5 of which had been in her home, who had suffered satanic abuse prior to coming to her home. When she located the health care workers, the foster care workers who came in, the caseworkers, and told them about this, there was a little hesitancy because people did not want to believe what she was telling. So she described and even videoed the children acting out how that they had participated in satanic practices, how they had participated in bleeding a baby, how they had participated, each one of the children that she had in her home who had been satanically abused, had participated and had personally killed a child. That is on this tape. This woman tonight is also dead. So it became very aware to me that someone did not want this story to get out. And so as I listened to this tape, someone would say, well, what business is it of yours in Texas to go to Nebraska? I mean, you have satanic practices in Texas. I mean, we dealt with that 2 years ago. We even have an attorney general that doesn't know a whole lot, but Maddox did finally get down there and recognize that Satanism is a very dangerous thing, which before he would not. And so why do you want to go? Why didn't you go to Matamoros? Why didn't you go to South Texas? Why do you come to Nebraska? I talked to a pastor up there, the same denomination which I belong to, and he looked at me and he said, you know, don't you have enough to do in Texas? And this is the attitude around the country that people, if it's not in your backyard, what business is it of yours? And it seems like they've forgotten the golden rule, that Jesus gave the example, no greater love hath any man, that he lay down his life for his friends. The example, he says, I give you a new commandment, that ye love one another. You know, the golden rule. But instead we seem to have a George Bush golden rule or a Kissinger golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. And they've managed to pervert Christian love into what business is it of yours? Because this is a pastor who should have been exhibiting Christian love toward me, instead ridiculed me and said, why do you drag your family up here? You told me you have 5 children. Where are your children? Well, they're with my family. As if I was guilty of child abuse because I left Texas, my children in the hands of my parents and my wife's parents, who, by the way, were delighted at the opportunity, but almost that I was guilty of child abuse because I left my children behind to go meddle in someone else's business. But when I was up there, and after talking with him right off the bat, you know, you try to, when you go to an area, you go to people whom you're familiar with. And I am a leading pro-life, some people would call me an agitator, an instigator, which I'm neither. But simply that the unborn child has been made very precious to me upon my mind, in the fact that I was conceived of a teenage mother, my wife was conceived of a 15-year-old mother. And that today society has said that these children, me, who would be born today in the like example, are not worthy of life. And in fact, the mother would be making a wise decision. Being that she hasn't provided for the care of that child, she would be wise in killing that child, into terminating her pregnancy, as it would be as if you could kill me now, then have me back later. Well, we've done a lot in science, but it hasn't done anything about bringing people back to life that we butcher in clinics. And so I became very aware. This is the same issue. This issue right here is property rights over human rights. Is this not what we're dealing with in the Middle East? Property rights over human rights. He who has the gold will make the rule on who shall live and who shall die. And this is what's going on in Nebraska. People who have a perverted mind, people who sodomize little boys, who, when one mother found the child that she had in her foster care home, she found that child after it had been taken from her. She loved this child very dearly. She found this child over a year later in an institution in Nebraska. The child had lost his mind, and he bore a colostomy. You know why the boy had a colostomy? Because the AIDS of that institution had ruined his rectum. That's why that child had a colostomy. That child wasn't anything like the child before. He had been destroyed. While the child was alive, the spirit, the body was alive, but the spirit of the child had been totally destroyed. 16 people came and before us. We came from around the country. Because time is short, I'm going to read, and then I'll stop at different points. I'll read our findings because they're very conclusive, and they come, and we're not finished. The first article that I was aware of, this is a reprint of it, and I'm going to hand them out and hand them around. These came out in the EIR. If you'll notice the date, you might be able to refer back to a copy that you would have at the house. And this EIR article has been reprinted in this fashion. This is an actual one. Over probably 20,000 copies have gone throughout Douglas County, which is Omaha, Nebraska area. And that article so outraged people that a new uproar was caused simply because a lady from the Schiller Institute named Suzanne Rose was up in the farming area up there. She had been made aware that we had less than 6 weeks of grain left in our grain elevators in America, the land of plenty. All of the grain elevators with corn were empty. We had less than 6 weeks' supply of grain left. They were investigating that, checking these elevators. Is this true? And so she ran upon this story, and then the group began to investigate it. And now here's a copy. These are just some of the newspaper articles. I put 1 and 2. I have over 750 newspaper articles about the collapse of the Franklin Federal Credit Union. The Franklin Federal Credit Union was run by a man who, I think it was described, the Republican Party, as the War Party. By the way, I'm a member of the War Party.
The War Party, Republicans and Democrats.
So anyway, of the War Party. Anyway, Mr. King is the wonderful baritone voice who was epitomized as the highest-ranking black official in the Republican Party. He sang over here in Dallas in 1984 at the convention, God Bless America. He sang the national anthem. Beautiful voice. And then they gave this glowing report how he was working in the minority community, how he had established a credit union there, and that people for the first time were getting loans. That was a red line district, but he has come in there, and what great economic success, and how that they were going to duplicate this throughout the country. In actuality, this carried on another 4 years, and then in 1988, he sang again. And he also held the most lavish parties, and people noticed, but no one could figure out how a man could hold multi-million-dollar. In fact, 1 month he spent on his American Express card $1,115,000. Now that's pretty good for a guy that only draws a salary of $15,000 a year as a small minority credit union. For some reason, it didn't sink into regulators' minds that something might be going wrong. In fact, this institution went 4 years without any scrutiny, without once having someone to come in and check his books, you know, like the IRS likes to do me every year. And so, but the credit union wasn't necessary because this guy was such a high-ranking Republican, respectable guy, he didn't bother checking. And so, after the collapse of the credit union, it was discovered that $38 million had disappeared. And also that, in fact, boys had been transferred around the country in private charter planes owned by the credit union. And that these children's homes, their parents said, I never took my son to San Francisco, but there was a picture of their boy with another boy in San Francisco. There was T-shirts that could be bought only in San Francisco. There were T-shirts that could only have been bought in Dallas, Texas at the convention. There was T-shirts that could have only been bought in Washington, D.C., sold by vendors on the streets. There was T-shirts from Miami, Florida. There was T-shirts from all over the country. These kids had pictures of where that Larry King had hauled them around as a male harem to service his clients. You know, some savings and loans give away toasters. Well, let me tell you, Larry King had a better deal. And so he went around the country, and the way he kept the boys quiet, if they wanted to get out, he would threaten them. They had pictures. I have pictures of you, and I'll turn them over to the police. And your parents will know, and they'll find out. And so by threats and by intimidation, the same way all Satanists work, by intimidating, taking pictures of the acts that occur, and by scaring the kids, and no one will believe you. And a lot of the kids who went out and told found out that no one did believe them. And in fact, the little girl on this tape right here, Alicia Owens, even though she bore a child by the police chief, Wadman, see, this is not just Larry King. The police chief is involved. He's in there committing all sorts of violent acts, of which I can't mention in a mixed group. Some of the newspaper articles did mix them. I've got pictures of, you know, all these are newspaper articles that went on. They just keep going on one after another. I just put them all together here, and you just sit there and read them. This was prepared by a man who was a foster parent. And he started chronicling the fact that when parents go and they report that satanic ritual crimes have been performed on their children, before they got them in their homes, that they, in fact, instead of trying to stop and help the children who become victims, they themselves became victims. And in fact, as the 16 witnesses came before us, 2 senators came before us, one lady whose name is Catherine Witt, who is the head of the Foster Care Review Board in the state of Nebraska. One question I asked every person who had had a child that had suffered or who was in a position of authority to investigate this, who came before our commission, the one question I asked them was, if you lived in Douglas County and your child was molested, would you report it to the police? And every one of them, without an exception, said no. Even though it's a crime not to report it. Even the hint in Nebraska, if you think a child is being molested, you are required by law to report it to the proper agency to be checked out. The fact of the matter is, every one of them who appeared before our commission knew that there was not a current remedy at law in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, Omaha is known as the head of Boys Town, is it not? It also is the head of the State Home for Girls, Utah Holly. And yet we found people who worked in both of these institutions, who appeared before our commission, who described how children were removed from these institutions to be used in this child trade by pedophiles. And so I'm going to read the statement that we had. The people came forward, they testified. Some of them were saying things that we were saying, this is really too difficult for us to even, it was many times my wife and I would go back to our motel room. We took the testimony for 6 straight days. And we'd go back to our motel room and we'd think, how are we going to sleep? What are we going to do? It put a great burden upon us that, in fact, we could not let this lie. Because anyone who knows of this horrible thing going on and then does nothing about it is like hearing the cries of a man on a road, crying for help. And these people were pouring out their hearts to us, fully expecting that we would do something to help them. And so we have to. It is incumbent upon us as human beings made in the image of God to respond in every way that we can, because we are not animals or beasts of the field. And so all these articles came about, and I'm looking for one that we'll find it in a minute here. And so we looked it over real well. We got a couple letters even from senators of the state of Nebraska. One of them was a letter welcoming us to, thanking us for our help, and if any way that we needed help that they would cooperate. And we found out when we went to their offices they were entirely sincere. That there are some people up there that are wonderful people that would do anything, but they realize that this battle is above their heads. When there is no current remedy at law, a meeting such as us talking here this evening is not safe. And in fact, if the names of the people could be gathered in the room together, none of the people in the room would be safe. And so it's an incumbent upon us now to fight that there will be a current remedy at law. But we see what's happened to Lyndon LaRouche. We see what's happened to children. When people who have the gold make the rule, it's a horrible society to live in. And we've got to change this. In Proverbs, in the Bible, Proverbs 29:2, it says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. And we saw in Omaha, Nebraska, what happens when evil rules. In fact, it follows up, it said, but when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. And that's what's happened in Omaha, Nebraska. We didn't find anyone who was rejoicing. But what has happened is that Nebraska does not have protective laws for children that they should have. That, in fact, a boy 16 years old and up is fair game for any adult. Although anyone knows that a child of 16 is not, even though, well, the federal standard is 18. But Nebraska, it's only 16. Homosexuality, there is no law against it in the state of Nebraska. I searched the criminal code books while I was there. There's not, the word homosexual does not even appear in the code book, and it's not even in the index. And so, or you check all, and the word pedophilia, the word, there's no crime of pedophilia listed in the book. So also, satanic practices are perfectly legal in the state of Nebraska. It can be considered as an alternative religion, and so when children are participating in drinking urine and participating in blood sacrifices and feces, then in fact there's not a law there to apply against that, to stop that behavior. So that's what shocked us, because we were looking, what is the remedy at law? And so it's very clear that this area has become a haven for pedophiles, and that even the Franklin grand jury, who was the chairman of the grand jury, was a convicted pedophile. He had to admit that there were 500 pedophiles in the area in the final report. There are 500 pedophiles active in, as what, this is just what they would admit to. So we don't know how many there are. So we issued, after 6 days of meeting with people. We met with Gary Caradori, the investigator who was hired by the state of Nebraska to investigate, whose airplane was blown out of the air with his son in it as they returned from a ball game. And we looked at the tape of Sorensen, Kathleen Sorensen, who was killed in a head-on car accident. And very timely, just before they needed to present their evidence, very timely deaths, very convenient for the enemy. And so we issued a final report, and I want to read the report here. This is the statement of the Citizens Fact-Finding Commission to investigate human rights violations of children in Nebraska. Approximately 1 month ago, the Washington, D.C. and Wiesbaden, Germany-based Schiller Institute received urgent requests for help from several citizens in Nebraska. Following the death of Senate Franklin Committee investigator Gary Caradori, these citizens felt that a high-level cover-up of child abuse surrounding the Franklin Credit Union scandal was underway, and that other lives, those of victim witnesses as well as others, were in danger. The Schiller Institute, in turn, put forth a call to other organizations throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. And a fact-finding group was constituted called the Citizens Fact-Finding Commission to investigate human rights abuse of children in Nebraska. The commission includes Suzanne Rose, Schiller Institute, Washington, D.C., David Hall, Texas Life Advocates, Fort Worth, Texas, Mimi Bull, lawyer, San Francisco, William Nezaway, president of the American Ukrainian Political Action Council of the United States from Pennsylvania, Danielle Alexander, treasurer, Students for Education and Economic Development from Washington, D.C., Reverend James Bevel, civil rights activist from Washington, D.C., Dr. Wayne Pulley, a clinical psychologist from Vancouver, British Columbia, Martin Humer, European Citizens Initiative to Protect Life and Human Dignity, Section Austria, Elke Femin, Club of Life, Munich, Germany, Karim Salah Majid Ibadullah from Los Angeles, an observer. This year, 1990, is being celebrated internationally as the Year of the Child, while this past Sunday was celebrated in Nebraska, as elsewhere in the country, as National Children's Day. All of us are compelled to do all in our power to protect the rights of our precious children. At the same time, over the past few days, we as a commission have heard evidence regarding pedophile activities on a massive scale here in Nebraska, as the Douglas County Grand Jury observed when it referred to some 500 pedophiles active in the Omaha area alone. We have repeatedly heard of satanic activities as well. To outsiders such as ourselves, the sheer magnitude of the problem is stunning, such that the Franklin case appears to be but the tip of the iceberg in this state. More specifically, over the past 6 days, this commission has reviewed extensive written material, watched 6 hours of a Gary Caradori interview with Alicia Owens, received anonymously in the mail, and a video on ritual satanic abuse in Nebraska, and interviewed 16 witnesses who have been central to this case. Through this, we have established the following. 1, there does seem to be a carefully crafted hoax. This is, quote, the statement that came from the grand jury around the Franklin affair, but that the hoax has been perpetrated by the Douglas County Grand Jury itself and by other institutions of government and by major portions of the news media to cover up these violations of human rights and to protect those who perpetrated those violations and to discredit those who are the advocates of the human rights of children. That there is a torture and a murder in progress being perpetrated against victim witness Paul Bonacci. Number 3, that those who have been highly visible and active in this case as advocates for the rights of children have been or currently are being terrorized. We have amassed extensive evidence in support of these conclusions and will be issuing a full report within approximately 4 weeks. In the meantime, we cite merely a few crucial facts to substantiate these general findings. Regarding point number 1, the existence of an official cover-up. aspects of the Douglas County Grand Jury report we find frankly astonishing. Though the jury's chief finding was that there was, quote, a carefully crafted hoax, it never even called for testimony the person it named as the chief orchestrator of the hoax, Michael Casey. Nor did it bother to call, or even did it attempt to call, Larry King, the central figure in the whole Franklin affair, who, by the way, was in town the whole time they met. Could have easily been called over there. Further, the grand jury seems to have relied heavily on the testimony of Troy Boner, that Alicia Owens was part of the perpetration of the hoax. Yet, if there is one person in this whole Franklin affair who has been definitively proven to be a liar, it is Troy Boner. Even the FBI, which also seems to have relied upon his veracity against Miss Owen, has called him a liar, in stating that the FBI never threatened Boner, as Boner claimed, over recanting his recantation. This boy has said it one way, he's said it another way, he's said it another way. It depends on who he's with at the time and what he needs to say to feel safe. This boy is a victim also. In other words, we're not saying this boy is just a liar and he doesn't need help. This boy, in fact, has been a victim, and so he's being used. Go back to our tape, our article here. We have further received extremely disturbing allegations regarding the grand jury's foreman, Michael Flanagan. It is outrageous that the jury's foreman, an official of Union Pacific, was not disqualified, since another Union Pacific official was a board member of the Franklin Credit Union. But still more serious are the allegations we have received that Mr. Flanagan, some 2.5 years ago, made aggressive homosexual advances toward a Union Pacific trainee, one John Dillard. Flanagan reportedly made a settlement with Dillard, who is no longer with Union Pacific. It is crucial that these allegations be further investigated. And the minute that this press release became public, John Dillard has disappeared from view and no one has found him since. Regarding the World Herald's role in this affair, the World Herald is the leading newspaper in Nebraska and in the Plains area there. Herald reporter Gabriella Stearns stated publicly on 2 separate occasions. Gabriella Stearns wrote quite a few of these articles here, along with Robert Dorr. Okay, they were the 2 leading reporters on the case. And Gabriella has stated that, publicly stated on 2 separate occasions, in the presence of numerous witnesses, that it was the official World Herald policy to protect homosexuals. In one of these instances, in Senator Smith's office, she stated words to the effect that, quote, "We can't do anything about the little fags because we have to protect the big fags," close quote. It is noteworthy that her own boss, or former boss, Harold Anderson, was accused as a pedophile and was also Larry King's chief backer for many years. He's the one who led all the campaign drives. He's the one who led the campaign drive to build a bedroom in the credit union. You know, every credit union needs a bedroom inside with a round brass bed with, that's just necessary. Regarding point number 2, that there is a torture and a murder in progress against Paul Bonacci. We have extensively reviewed the accusations of Paul Bonacci and we find them extremely credible. While we were there, we viewed a tape of sworn testimony of Paul Bonacci, and the clinical psychologist in our group, I talked to Wayne, I said, Dr. Poley, is this kid lying? And he said, if this kid's lying, he deserves at least 2 Oscars. And extremely credible. I do not have a copy of that tape. I don't have privilege to it. We also spoke to Paul Bonacci's psychiatrist, who said that he did not say what the press reported repeatedly, that he was a liar, that Bonacci was incapable of telling the truth, which appears also to have been repeated by the Douglas County Grand Jury. Instead, Dr. Meade not only says that Bonacci is capable of telling the truth, but that he fully believes Bonacci is telling the truth. In fact, he said, I believe he's always told the truth. Bonacci is a crucial figure in this case who has testified to sexual abuse involving several high-level Nebraskans. There is clearly an attempt underway to destroy Mr. Bonacci both physically and psychologically. From testimony taken, we note the following. A. Mr. Bonacci's weight has dropped from 150 pounds in November of last year to 110 pounds 2 weeks ago. B. He has had at least one inmate put in his cell, one that we know the name and the threat. One inmate put in his cell who previously threatened his life, and this was done despite the express promise of one Lieutenant Hubbard to Paul Bonacci's attorney, John DeCamp, that this would not be done. In fact, the man was searched after being in his cell for a few hours. Paul was up all night long, worried about his life. When they searched the man, he had nails hidden in his tennis shoe, and he had a toothbrush that was sharpened to a point, all which could have been easily killed him had he gone to sleep. Paul Bonacci, C, was given no blanket during the Nebraska winter, last winter. Now, I know what it is to be thrown in a jail cell without a cot, without a pillow, without a blanket. But can you imagine an entire winter for a child who has been abused, who has suffered, who doesn't have the comfort of a home? What's that?
How old?
Right now, he is 23. I think he's 23 now. But this boy has suffered abuse all these years. Paul Bonacci, when he was finally given a blanket, he was given a wool blanket. This spring, they gave him a wool blanket. He's allergic to wool. And he has repeatedly stated that to prison authorities, that he is allergic to wool. D, in the Douglas County Jail, he is having a much greater incidence of psychological difficulties associated with his multiple personalities disorder than he had previously had while in Lincoln. And you'd have problems too if you had people in your cell with threatening your life. You'd be all winter long without a blanket. You can imagine the problems that you might have. Paul Bonacci is not the only, oh, by the way, E, Mr. Bonacci has consistently been given foodstuffs to which he is allergic to and to which he has told the prison authorities that he is allergic to. And he's allergic to lactose, any milk products. And yet every meal, and sometimes it's been the only beverage that he's been given to drink is milk and cheese on his food. He cannot handle that.
What's he in jail for?
He's in jail because he dared to testify. He's in jail, that we feel, on trumped-up charges. His family, when we talk to his family, feels trumped-up charges. And in fact, he trumped-up charges of fondling minor children of neighbors who were in the house, of which that even the parents of two of the children say they don't believe anything ever happened. But the state is pressing charges, not the parents whose children supposedly he fondled. He maintains complete innocence, so does his family. It's believed that he's in jail as a setup, simply to keep him away from other people, because he's decided to talk. Now that's the thought that was expressed to us. That's not part of our report, however. Mr. Bonacci is not the only victim witness whose life is in jeopardy. It has been stated to us that the guards who accompany Alicia Owens on her exercise walk all wear body armor, bulletproof vest. She does not. Regarding point number 3, the terrorization of advocates for the right of children, it is clear to us that the most significant piece of evidence which points to a high-level cover-up is the atmosphere of terror in the state among those associated with the Franklin case. Were it merely a case of Alicia Owen and Paul Bonacci in a carefully crafted hoax, then presumably the following would not have happened. A, Alicia Owens' attorney, Henry Rosenthal, would not have had a hole in his windshield, which Mr. Rosenthal describes as a bullet hole. B, Senator Smith and Paul Bonacci's attorney, John DeCamp, would not have been the subject of death threats and or highly reliable information from police departments that their lives are in danger. C, the telephones of members of the concerned parents group would not have been tapped, as the phone company itself has confirmed that they are in at least one instance, and we were told of several, but the phone company did report one. D, that high-level state officials as well as parents would not have stated to us that were one of their children to be molested in Douglas County, they would not report it. even though such non-reportage is breaking the law. And E, and finally, Alicia Owens would not be facing an unheard of 360 years for perjury. In addition, by the way, she's in jail, has been in jail for a year. Her case has not come to trial. She is incarcerated in jail. She has committed no crime. But she's been in jail over a year. There is not a trial date set, by the way. You thought that only happened to General Noriega, didn't you? Well, it can happen to children, too. It can happen to you. It can happen to you. It can happen to me. I was jailed this year, picked up as I was merrily driving down the road and put in jail for investigation of burglary. Not that there was a burglary. No burglary ever occurred. They simply did not want me to arrive at a certain place to speak at a meeting. So it can happen to you. It can happen to any one of us. It's happened right here in Dallas County. But right here, let's go on here. We also, in addition, the death of investigator Gary Caradori we find to be extremely suspicious. If his plane crash were merely an accident, then why has his family reportedly been receiving death threats before and since? Why, also, we question the disparaging remarks made to us by the FBI attacking Mr. Caradori's credibility. We went and interviewed the FBI. They thought that we were a Sunday school or a Mrs. Brown's 5th grade civics class, and we walked in. And then when it became evident that our questions were not one they wanted to answer, they sent in their top dogs and then hid us back in the room, and then they said, "And what is your name? Your full name? What is your birth date?" We gave it to them. We're free citizens. We're not ashamed, nor are we fearful. And so why also the disparaging remarks made to us by the FBI attacking Mr. Caradori's credibility and the ongoing attack against his character since his death by the World Herald? In conclusion, the victims and child advocates in this case all feel they have little or no remedy at law within the state of Nebraska at present. Therefore, we are committed to reporting back to our own organizations and to many others beyond us in the U.S. and around the world the scandal of the Nebraska child abuse cover-up. We feel that only an international spotlight on the cover-up in conjunction with an aroused citizenry in the state of Nebraska can achieve justice for this state and a happy, secure future for its citizens. The Commission will issue its final report in several weeks. Based on the multitude of unanswered questions, this Commission will continue its work beyond the issuance of that report. Finally, we salute the courage and the work of the Senate Franklin Committee and the brave people of Nebraska attempting to bring forth further evidence. That's the close of our report. I talked to a lady this evening, one who was a private citizen who was interviewed by the grand jury when they met. We feel the grand jury, after looking at their report and after looking at other information, was simply involved in covering up so that the truth would not come out. It's very clear that parents who reported crimes against their children, in fact, became future victims. We did not, I talked to several officials in other areas of Nebraska, some which I had gone to school with in Missouri who lived up there, and other acquaintances. I'm called pro-life people throughout the state, talked to them about I did not find anyone in the state of Nebraska that felt that this was not true of what I'm telling you tonight. I didn't find anyone. I found a lot of people who were extremely afraid. I found a lot of cowards. But I also found a lot of brave people that simply did not know what to do. And so simply by us speaking about it here tonight, about us, maybe if we have a friend in Nebraska, if we will call up there and encourage them, if in fact encourage them to do the right thing. For different people, it'll be different things. But you will know the strength that you have. You'll know the pressure that you can bring to bear so that children in Nebraska will be able to grow up and have a culture of enlightenment and not one of fear. And I appreciate your time.
During the course of their visit to Omaha, the Citizens Commission paid a visit to the field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation to ask questions and to discuss the material that they had amassed. The following are remarks made by Mr. Hall concerning that visit to the FBI field office in the question and answer session which followed his presentation.
I wrote this down because I sat in the same room when we showed them a copy of this report right here. The guy said, "I don't want to see that. That's trash." And so I asked him, I said, "Oh, by the way, you'd be interested in the man's name. The special assistant, or assistant special agent who has been moved in there to handle this case is none other than Dennis Aiken." Does anybody remember the name of Dennis Aiken? He was used to cover up the Iran-Contra affair also. So I don't know why Nebraska rates such a high-level representative, but I do think that they realize that the wheels of this cover-up could very easily come off if they don't pay a lot of attention. And so we were up there undoing bolts on those wheels. And so here's what he said when we mentioned that article. He said, oh, okay. "These persons have a special interest in telling lies." I'll get over here on the right page. Okay, here it is. Here it is. "I will not even acknowledge the existence of that bogus paper." And then we said, "What makes this paper bogus?" And we held up the EIR. And he replied, "Your leader is in jail." Direct quote, "Your leader is in jail." And see, they think by putting you in jail, you become bogus. Well, when they hung Jesus on a cross, did he become bogus? No, they did not. In fact, they haven't learned a thing about martyrdom, have they? They haven't learned a thing. Your leader is in jail. Martyrdom, if a cause is worth dying for, then it's a cause worth living for. And so the same tyranny, the same mistake that tyrants have always made throughout ages, they're making again, because that is the mentality of a tyrant. Okay, and I'll go on. It even gets worse here. Everything in that article wasn't factual. And so we said, well, what made it bogus? Well, everything wasn't factual. What in that article? Can you point out one thing that wasn't factual? Have you read the article? And he admitted, yes, he read the article. In fact, I imagine he sat up all one night with that article. The information is not even worth commenting on. Well, if it wasn't commenting on, why did he read the article? I am aware of all of the facts. So now we have the head conspirator here, because he is aware of all the facts. These are all quotes. Everything I read here is a quote. Quote, "That was bizarre." Quote, "That was scandalous. It had no basis in fact. That was the most bogus, spiteful, ill-conceived article I have ever seen since I have been in the FBI." Well, apparently they don't even read their own monthly journal. So they evidently, speaking of the article, they evidently didn't do their homework, or they purposely told lies for whatever reason. Their intent was to do irreparable harm. Harm to what? Harm to a cover-up? Most assuredly. Here's what the FBI said that aligned them with the cover-up. More than anything, you know, when I went down and I talked to the governor in the state of Texas about abortion, he said, "I am in agreement with your cause." Well, very clear. The governor just said, Bill Clements just said to me, it's not his cause, even though he's supposed to be a pro-lifer, but it was my cause. And so these little phrases are giveaways. We asked them, aren't you aware that by allowing Alicia Owens to stay in jail for a year without trial, that in fact, don't you realize that sends a message to all people who would come forward to report a crime, that they in fact, instead of finding relief, would actually be imprisoned? Because that's what this little girl did. She came forward and told the truth, and therefore she's in jail. In fact, she's handled by people with body armor, and she's out there in a pink suit, and they take her walk around for a walk every day, you know, kind of like a target. Pink suit's almost like a birthmark. You know, she'll be out there in a pink suit at 3 o'clock. You know, anybody wants to take a shot with a camera or with anything else. But anyway, we asked him, and so the FBI's agent's actual comment was, I realize that this would perhaps cause future damage to future victims coming forward, and those damage their reputation, that it would cause damage. And he said here, we would have been, this is quote, we would have been fools charging her with perjury if we weren't prepared to hang our laundry out. Well, see, we thought it was the grand jury that charged them with Alicia Owens with perjury. But the FBI has admitted, in their own words, in their own office, in a company of worldwide representatives there, that they were the ones who orchestrated the cover-up. They were the ones who put an innocent girl in jail for over a year because they feel that they have the goods. In other words, what they feel they have a little girl in jail because they feel that she belongs there. Not because a court of citizens has ruled that, in fact, this girl's lying, but in fact that the FBI, in the best interest of the FBI, has this girl in jail. So he said, if this goes to trial, his comment was, if this goes to trial. Okay. It apparently is in the best interest of the FBI that this does not go to trial. So we have so when you go to see a lion in his cage, he cannot act like a kitty cat. He will always be a lion. The worst thing the FBI could have ever done was to talk to us. They also said here, there are victims in this case. Quote, there are victims in this case who are victims of child abuse, but not of the crimes they have alleged. And his next phrase was, we have homosexual informers. Close quote. Well, I've got more here, but I know you got to... I think they have homosexual agents. I'll just be very bold.
At the conclusion of the Citizen Commission's visit, they held a press conference in Omaha to release the findings and their statement. Present at the press conference were the written press and several radio stations, and many of the persons who had turned out to testify as witnesses at the Commission's hearings. The effect of the Commission's appearance in the state and their willingness to put themselves on the line for these victims gave many of them courage which they had previously not had. And this is what David Hall had to say about what happened at that press conference.
This is a picture of Paul Bonacci. His fiancée came and talked to us and told us about the treatment he'd received, how he'd been put in lockdown. Now, since that I'll get back over here. Since that we have been there, do you realize that within 1 hour after this press release was released, that Paul Bonacci was taken out of lockdown? That by taking out of lockdown, that means that he now can listen to a radio. That means that he now can hear sounds of other people around him, that he's not in total isolation from other people. He had been kept in lockdown many times as a threat. This last time he was put in lockdown because they said he had done damage to his jail cell that he had just been transferred into. And Paul's attorney says he didn't do any damage. It looked to him that the damage had been old, but they simply put him in lockdown so there wouldn't be any way that one of our commission would be able to talk with him while we were in town. They were very aware that we were there. Also, immediately after this was made public, Paul Bonacci began to receive nourishing meals. They removed the lactose. Also, Paul Bonacci received a blanket that he could use to cover his body. Also, I talked to a lady tonight, and that he's now been moved. Just as soon as I could get the paperwork, they moved him from Douglas County, where they were abusing him, and have now moved him to Lincoln County, or the county of the capital, Lincoln, Nebraska, where it looks like that they're trying to fatten him up because they're afraid of what? See, what does truth do? Truth is a light. and it shines brightly, and even the smallest child with a candle will bring forth illumination upon a subject. So we were there like children because we were just learning. We weren't Nebraska citizens. We hadn't been there through the all of it. But simply there, we were able to hold up a candle by having that press conference at the Omaha Press Club. And also that Alicia Owens, there's been a lot of pressure been put on her family also, that it looks like now that after the candlelight vigil that we talked to the people about, we told them how in Dallas we had candlelight vigils for some of our people, and that now after the candlelight vigil there's been a lot more of attention. Articles have begun to appear. And we told them at the close of the press conference, as they have treated you, so they will treat us. And we want to identify with you. And if it means that our lives are in danger because your lives are in danger, we welcome that. Because we want to identify with you, even to the same point that Gary Caradori identified with you. At that point, Gary Caradori's mother, who was in the press conference, she came forward, and Robert Dorr, the newspaper man who had written all the horrible articles, who was involved in the cover-up, who is a single man who lives at home with a lot of male friends. He had abused the Caradori name and family continuously. Even on the day of his funeral, they wrote a slanderous article in the paper about Gary Caradori, who in fact had done the wishes of what he was hired to do by the Nebraska state legislature. And so his mother came forward and she said, "Robert Dorr, I hate you. I hate your paper. You and your paper are at the center of all that is evil in the state of Nebraska." And she continued to speak her views, and there wasn't a dry eye in that place. I was crying, and I looked around, and I noticed that other people were moved. But this is the bravery of the citizen that comes forth. Like what happened in Central Europe. They said, "I can't take it anymore," and they took to the streets. And that little lady picked up her purse, and she was ready to do battle. In fact, she said, "Give me a copy of all those newspaper articles. Give me a copy of this." And I thanked her for what she had to say. But she invigorated every person within that room that they were willing, maybe not to do something before, but after they saw this mother who had lost her son, they were willing to do battle.
Needless to say, this press conference drew blood. On October the 28th, the Omaha World Herald printed an article attempting to discredit the findings of the Citizens Commission. However, one of the sources which they cited as authoritative was one Mara Lansky-Boland, an operative of the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, who has been involved for many years in attempting to discredit the LaRouche movement. Mara Lansky-Boland has strange collaborators in this effort, and in a delightful twist of fate, has recently been exposed for the quality of collaboration which she utilizes in attempts to discredit LaRouche. The case involves a former supporter of Mr. LaRouche, an elderly woman by the name of Helen Overington, who was convinced by Mara Boland to cease her support and to initiate legal proceedings to try to recoup the financial support she had already given. She was aided in this effort by an Episcopalian minister named Michael Rokas from Baltimore, Maryland, who was also the president of an organization called the Cult Awareness Network, which maintains that the LaRouche organization is itself a cult. Michael Rokas was just exposed in the Baltimore Sun as having been arrested in 1982 for approaching a vice officer in a park in Baltimore and soliciting deviant sex. As a result of the article in the Baltimore Sun, Reverend Rokas has been forced to resign as president of the Cult Awareness Network. A hearing that had been called to attempt to revoke the bail of the LaRouche fundraiser who had been involved in soliciting support from Helen Overington was suddenly canceled. This is the quality of the opposition which we have. However, it will take many exposés such as this, and additional citizens finding the courage to act, such as those citizens in Omaha, Nebraska have now found. If you would like to help, please call the numbers appearing on your screen, and you can obtain free information. Thank you for watching.